Hey guys, Happy New Year! It is 2023 already, if you can believe that, and time for another tutorial. This month we have a couple pieces to work on. The one I'm going to be working on right now is the heart shaker. These are so stinking cute. I don't know if you've ever done one before, but it's a multi-layer piece that has little diamonds in the middle, and when you shake it, it rattles around, and it's super cute. As far as putting it together, it's pretty easy. We're just going to paint the 3 wood layers, and you can paint them whatever colors you want. I did the background in pink and then the other 2 layers in white, but you can do it however you want to match your decor. So I know a lot of people didn't really care for a Valentine's Day box, but there were some that did. So I tried to make this one a little versatile. So if you wanted a Valentine's Day theme box, you can certainly paint these in Valentine's colors, or you can keep it totally neutral, and you can keep this one up year round. It's totally up to you. When you're painting this second layer here, the only thing that's really going to be visible is the lettering. However, I went ahead and I painted the entire heart just in case I don't line up the layers perfectly. It'll still show white, and you'll see that once we start putting it together. But there is going to be that other heart with no letters in the middle. That's going to be like a frame, so it's going to cover most of what I'm painting right now except for the lettering. So to paint these pieces, I am using a makeup sponge. For those who've been around for a while, that's how I paint most of my smaller pieces. If you're new here, this is the best way that I have found to paint these. You can paint them with a paintbrush or other methods, but the sponge is the easiest way, in my opinion. When you're trying to use a paintbrush on these smaller pieces, you're going to get paint along the edges, and sometimes it looks a little sloppy. But the makeup sponge, as long as you use very little paint and you're doing light taps, it's not going to get a lot of paint around the edges, and it just looks a little bit cleaner. But use what you have. Anytime you're painting with lighter colors like white or even the light pink, you're probably going to want to do more than 1 coat just to get good coverage, and that's perfectly fine. I think I did 2 or maybe even 3 coats on the white, and then definitely I did 2 coats on the pink. Once you're finished painting, make sure everything's completely dry. Then you can start gluing your pieces together. So start with the base, which is pink in my case. Then you're going to glue on the lettering layer. I use super glue. You can use whatever kind of glue you have. I like the super glue because it sets really fast, and I am an impatient person. So this works really quick for me. But go ahead and line up the layers the best that you can and glue them together. Once that layer is glued down, then you're going to grab your diamonds and you're going to pour those into your shaker. I like to put some on the top, some in the bottom, just kind of however they fall. But make sure you have them placed the way you want them, because once you glue everything together, you're not going to be able to move them. They're going to move around within their own little spaces, but I like to make sure that they're evenly distributed. And then you're going to glue on your acrylic layer. Now the acrylic, I did leave it with the paper masking on it just to keep the acrylic nice and clean and fingerprint free. So peel off one piece of the paper backing. Try not to touch the acrylic or set it down anywhere, because it does pick up linties and things like that pretty easily. And then put a little bit of glue around the edge. Don't glue on the lettering itself because you will be able to see it. even if you're using a clear glue, you'll be able to see it once it dries. So just around the edges, and then the frame will cover up any glue spots that you will see. And then again, line up those layers the best that you can and glue it down. And then once that's glued down, you can peel off the top layer of masking and then glue on your frame. And then finished it off by gluing the frame on top. This next part's optional, but I went ahead and I painted the edges of this one. Most of the time I don't paint edges, but this one is a little bit thicker than most, and you are going to be able to see it a little bit more. So I went ahead and I painted it just to give it a little extra finished look. Again, 2 to 3 coats to get good coverage, and then this piece is done. Next, we'll work on the other sign that says this is our happy place, and we'll also work on painting the wreath. So for the this is our happy place sign, I went ahead and used the baby wipe method to paint the background in brown, which basically, if you're not familiar with that method, you just paint with a baby wipe or a damp paper towel. This allows for a little bit lighter coverage than normal paint sponges or brushes. So it allows some of like the wood texture to show through to give it more of a stained look. The great thing about the baby wipe method is if it is a little too light, you can always put on a second coat and build on it. Or if it comes out a little bit too dark, get a clean baby wipe and wipe some of it off before it dries. It's a really versatile technique. And to paint the rest of these little pieces, I will use a paint sponge. On the bigger sign, I did decide to distress it a little bit with the distressing brush that you got in your starter kit. So I distressed it with white, but you could do it with whatever colors you want. But basically, I just get a little bit of paint on the brush, wipe some of it off, and then very, very lightly go over the sign. You can always put a little bit extra paint on there if you want it super heavy, but I like to go super light. I also wanted to give the wreath a little bit of dimension, so I did paint some of the leaves a darker green just to make it pop a little bit. And this brush is nothing special. It's just a very small detail brush that I got from Hobby Lobby or Michael's or something. It came in a set. And once you're done painting, you can start gluing all your pieces together. And then these ones will be done as well. And then here I'll show you how I tied the little twine for the wreath. So basically I just tied a knot up at the top to make a loop, and then I cut off the excess. And then I just wrap it around and put that top part, sorry I go off screen a little bit, put that top part through the loop and then pull tight. And it may take some adjusting. Once you get it displayed, you may want to adjust the length of your twine just a little bit. I know with this one I ended up shortening it just a little bit just so it lays right on the finished piece. But that's how you do it. The next thing we're going to work on is the base for the shutter. So you're going to grab your sanding sponge and give it a quick sand, especially around the edges. If you want it to be a little bit more rustic, you don't have to do quite as much sanding. If you want it nice and smooth, sand it a little bit more. You can also round out the edges if you want the base to have rounded edges. I didn't round out the edges too much on mine, but I did give it a little extra sanding. Once you're happy with the way it's sanded, then you can start either painting or staining, depending on what you want to do. I painted this using the baby white method, and I did a custom color mix, just using acrylic paint. I wanted kind of a brownish gray, so I mixed those two together. Make sure you mix them up really good, and make sure you mix more paint than what you think you're going to need, especially when you're doing custom colors. Because if you run out halfway through the project, it's really hard to make the exact same color again. And then once you get everything mixed, just start applying your paint with your baby wipe. Again, with this method, if it comes out too light the first time, you can always add a second coat. Or if it comes out a little too dark, You can take a clean baby wipe and wipe some of it off. Or you can go in with a secondary color and do a second coat. So with mine, I painted the whole thing, and then I decided it was a little lighter than what I wanted, or a little bit more gray than what I wanted. So I actually went back in after and did a layer of just brown, and then it turned out the way that I had pictured it in my head. The nice thing about this method is you can play around with the different colors, and until you're happy with the finished product. Once you're happy with the way it looks, you can let it dry, and then you are done with this piece. The last thing we have to paint is the shutter. Now, you don't have to use spray paint. You can use the sponge method, you can use a paintbrush, you can paint it however you wanted to. I personally like the way it looks with the spray paint, and it's fast. The reason I like the spray paint so much is you can get the edges a lot easier. So for a larger piece that's going to be standing up and stay up year round, I wanted the edges to look a little bit cleaner, and the spray paint allows you to do that. If you decide to use spray paint, use light coats, 2 to 3, especially if you're painting white. And also make sure that you clean up any char marks that are left on the wood from the laser. You can clean those up with a baby wipe, or you can sand them off. But if you don't, if you leave those char marks on there and you paint over it, it will seep through the paint, and you'll be able to see it after it completely dries. You won't be able to see it right away, but after it dries, it'll start looking a little brown in those charry parts. And again, this part is totally optional. You can sponge paint this. You can paint it with a paintbrush. It is probably going to take a little bit longer, especially if you want to paint the edges, but you can do it. Once all your pieces are painted, then we're going to glue it together. First thing you want to start with is your shutter and the frame. So go ahead and glue those two pieces together. And make sure you line it up at the very top. That way we leave room at the bottom for the base. Next, you'll flip it over and we'll start attaching the slats. Obviously I didn't paint the back, so it doesn't look very good, but you certainly could paint the back if you wanted to. And I might go back and paint the back later. So for slat number 1, just put a little bit of glue on both of the sides and then the very top. And you're going to glue that down. And then the next slat is going to overlap at the bottom just a hair. And I'll show you that here in just a moment. You want to overlap them in such a way that they look like this when you're done. And then lastly, you'll glue on your little peg that is going to hold your wreath on. So you glue on the smaller circle up at the very top, right underneath the frame. And then you'll glue the larger circle on top of that. And that'll give you a space to hang your wreath. And then lastly, we're going to attach the base to the shutter itself. So I did send 3 screws, so you can screw it together. I also recommend gluing it down first, just to help secure it in place while you put the screws in. Next, we're just going to screw the shutter onto the base just to make it a little bit more secure. I included 3 screws. All you're going to need is a Phillips head screwdriver. And there's real no trick to it. Just insert each screw into the little pilot hole that I drilled in the back of the shutter and screw it in. And repeat the process for the other 2 screws. Once you have all 3 screws in, then you are done with this project. Get it all displayed and take some pictures.